And a lot of people in the enterprise world are like very dismissive of things like crypto. They take a really generic view towards data as well, interestingly. So it's just like, well, just throw this in a lake and we'll figure out what to do with it later. The truth is that that's just not going to last. Data is too big, it's too distributed, and so on. You're going to have to figure out a way to like manage this data where it's not just, super generic. That said, like I said, crypto can be a path into that.
None of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by WAGMI Ventures or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Hey everyone, Benga here with WAGMI Ventures podcast. On today's episode, we have David Aronchick, co-founder of Expanso, a startup built to help enterprises manage their ever-growing data needs with a distributed approach to big data processing, powered by its open source software, Bacal. For anyone who is new, this is WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting builders and founders in the space across crypto and AI. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. Thank you for joining us, and let's enjoy the conversation with David. Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fantastic.
Yeah, we are excited to have you on and just get all the insights and stories that you're going to share with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. A huge fan.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to just jump right into it. You are almost a lifelong technologist, and we'd love to hear about your journey and how this has all come together up onto this point.
So it's a really interesting question. It starts, of course, with just being a nerd. And that's certainly where we kind of like the initial direction happened. My background is I really wanted to go and be a doctor of all things, and went into or graduated from college with that very much in mind. But then I ended up going and working at the NIH. I'd always been a fan of computing and technology. And when I was working at the NIH, I ended up doing a lot of work on brain scans, PET scans, things like that, using very large at the time sun machines in order to like get things up and running. And I quickly discovered that this was a career that I wanted to pursue. And so I did so. I've done both consumer and enterprise throughout my career. This is my fourth startup. I've done 3 before this. I've also worked at Amazon and Microsoft twice, and Google and Chef. And the most recent arc of my career started in about 2015 when I was one of the first non-founding PMs for Kubernetes, which I led on behalf of Google. And so that's kind of like how I landed in this, just an area of passion and just helped me direct my world.
Awesome. I think your journey is a unique one from starting out as wanting to be a medical doctor to transitioning on to more on the technology side of things. And as that transition sort of continued, like from Kubernetes to Kubeflow to Protocol Labs, talk to us more about what that transition looks like. I know you're going to indulge us a little bit in the stories behind some of these names, whether it's Kubeflow or Expanso. Yeah, definitely want to hear more on that.
Yeah, the transition was pretty straightforward. When I was working at at Google on Kubernetes, I basically saw the problem that I basically spent the past, 10 years trying to solve, which is it's great for a centralized platform, but the moment you need to do anything beyond just pure centralized platform, that's where you start to run into problems. What do those problems look like? Well, it could be that you have your machines spread all over the place. It could be that you have data spread all over the place. It could be you just have a lot of machines and you want to treat them like one. There's just a lot of like angles there. And I kept seeing that on Kubernetes. That's not to say Kubernetes isn't great. It's just there's kind of a different angle for that kind of system. So initially, I did the work on that for about 3 years, and I had a very good experience doing it. And then I became pretty obsessed with ML and AI. I don't have much of a background in it, that or math or anything, but I just learned it on the fly. And that's when I started Kubeflow. And I did that at Google and then moved to Microsoft to continue work in ML, AI, and so on. And that's when Protocol Labs came ringing. And Protocol Labs is such a groundbreaking place because of all the things that they built that are still in extremely broad use today, lib P2P, IPFS, and so on. There's just so many different technologies that have been implemented and are making our world better. One of the things that they were seeing internally was, again, that story that I just related, which is people would get this ridiculous amount of data and then say, well, what do I do with it? And that's where things really kind of came together. Shortly after I started there, we tried to figure out like what you were going to do with your data. And just because of things like the speed of light, there's only so much you can do. There's only so much movement you can do, so on and so forth. So altogether, what this meant was that we were going to have to shift jobs to where the data was being stored, simply because of things like the speed of light. You can't make that go any faster. And that would be necessary in order to light up 18 exabytes of stuff that is sitting on IPFS and Filecoin. So that's when we started the project. We were in Portugal at the time, and we kept calling this compute over data, COD. We kept abbreviating that as COD. And then somebody came up with the idea that, like, well, we keep calling it COD. What's the Portuguese word for COD? It's bacalhau. And that's kind of how we netted out with that name. And so the idea is, by leaning into this world of, hey, the reality is that data is growing, that compute is growing everywhere, not just in centralized data centers. Speed of light's not getting any faster. We're going to have an architecture that looks like this. And that's exactly what bacalhau is.
Yeah, thank you for that background. I think you've sort of cut in nicely into what I was going to ask next, which was, around the inspiration behind Expanso and bacalhau and that driving principle of computing over data, so COD. But so definitely thank you for unpacking that. It's been almost a year since you launched, if I'm not mistaken. How's that journey been like so far?
It's a startup, to say the least, meaning you can do a bunch of really cool things, but also it's a lot of work. It'll just eat up every second of your day, month, year, so on and so forth. I've just been astounded at how big our community is already. For folks that we really haven't even gotten going, and we have 1,000 people on our Slack channel and tens of thousands of downloads every month, and so on. That's all great. But on the other side, we really are a commercial business. And so getting those initial customers up and running and using us is just absolutely critical. And so you're never done working on that.
And I imagine that a good amount, if not the entire platform, is focused on enterprise clients,
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Great. And what, if I was an enterprise, how should I be thinking about data? How should I be thinking about crypto? And how does that all tie into Expanso?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of people in the enterprise world are like very dismissive of things like crypto. They're also they take a really generic view towards data as well, interestingly. So it's just like, well, just throw this in a lake and we'll figure out what to do with it later. The truth is that's just not going to last. Data is too big, it's too distributed, and so on. You're going to have to figure out a way to like manage this data where it's not just super generic. That said, like I said, crypto can be a path into that, but people get really suspicious. Well, what are they doing with the crypto? Whether this, that. The truth is, crypto absolutely has a role. It provides a distributed ledger. This is an extremely hard problem for folks to deal with. They may not even realize how hard the problem is. But at the end of the day, even inside a single organization, let alone across the world, enterprises could absolutely use this distributed ledger to do good things. So I would very strongly suggest that folks not dismiss crypto out of hand because it's gotten some bad, some bad folks around the edges. Because even in enterprises, I think it can offer quite a bit of value right out of the gate.
Right. Hey, everybody. Quick thing here. We're excited to announce WAGMI Advisory, your home for all things fundraising, hiring, and partnerships. This is all about supercharging your project with the WAGMI network consisting of over 20,000 executives, investors, and builders in crypto, all ready to come alongside your project to help it succeed. Get in touch at team@wagmeventures.io to learn more and figure out if Wagme Advisory is the right fit for your project. Let's get back to the show. How does the challenges of reproducibility in technology tie into all of that?
So this is one of these like amazing things that people just don't realize how fragile and I don't know, non-reproducible the world is. The number of times people publish papers only to have it be discovered that 10 years later something was not used or they got something wrong or whatever it is, you name it. And the truth is that you're never going to get to 100% reproducibility because the world is not 100% reproducible, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but that doesn't mean you should give up. Like, we need to get to a place where many, if not most of the things in the process are reproducible. What does that mean? Well, what data you used, what job you executed, what drivers you were using, what OS version you were using, so on and so forth. These should be fairly straightforward to reproduce. And it's up to us to build the tools so that data scientists and others can work on these things in a super powerful way without having to get super complicated and deeper in and have to understand all the subtleties of whatever Docker container layers, so on and so forth. So what I would say is like we all need to come together so that scientists can work on the things that they are great at and focus on those things in order to, make our entire world better. That's what I would say.
Right. Thanks. That was a great insights there. And just on that thought, allowing scientists to kind of do what they do best and making for better understanding and better innovation in this space. How are you at Expanso through your open source code software here at Acal? How is that product helping to simplify and advance a lot of the problems you talked about and also advancing cloud and AI in the enterprise space?
Yeah, great question. So what we believe in is the right thing here is to give people the levels of abstraction that allow them to, focus on the things that are important. So that necessarily means that they can focus on Python or SciPy or NumPy or whatever, which are languages and tools and things that they know about without having to understand how to build a Docker container or roll it out to these various locations or all that kind of good stuff. So that's what we think the right path is here. Give people a bunch of abstractions and metadata and things where they can live that is very similar to the tools they already know and love, whatever, Excel, R, Jupyter notebooks, so on. And under the hood, make reproducibility, built in by default. Make sense?
Yes, makes sense. And if it's built in by default, it is part of like just simplifying that process where you're just not having to worry about that piece of your overall platform or stack, which again just makes the value prop of what you're building much more important. So, and again, it is an enterprise solution. So forgive me if all my questions are sort of like in that same breath, but I think about what enterprises are largely concerned about: large costs, so data gravity, responsiveness, and the regulatory environment in which they have to behave or act or be compliant with. Can you just share, broad stroke, your thoughts on all these and how Expanso is addressing them?
Yeah, it's a great insight, and it's absolutely, critical for people who are playing in any of the areas you just talked about. I love to build into the things that are, for lack of a better term, immutable. What does that mean? Well, the speed of light's not getting any faster. Data is growing and will continue to grow and continue to accelerate its growth. Regulations continue to increase. So this is a long way of saying all these things together mean that if you make an assumption that these things are going to remain true forever, then that really means you also are going to make an assumption that anything that leans into those areas is also going to be super valuable. And so if you're an enterprise today, you have to care so much about things that, like, even 5 or 10 years ago were like completely foreign to you. Like I said, data provenance, for example. Like, nobody cared about data provenance 10 years ago, even though they should have. Well, probably they did 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. But today you do. You need to think about that very hard. Where did my data come from? How do I know this is the most recent data? What am I doing with this data? What downstream models are using this data, etc. And so this is a long way of saying you're going to have tools that automatically provide this, because human beings are fallible. They are guaranteed to forget or mistake or other things around this stuff. If your tool chain doesn't automatically provide audit logs and provenance and security and reproducibility manifests and things like that, it's just not going to happen. Yet, it's really important to your business.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because I like to think of a lot of the conversations that we're having as a society today in the regulatory space as it relates to data and AI and a lot of projects that are being built today. And so Expanso in its role in like solving a lot of these like data load issues, data density, data gravity, organization, all of that, and marrying that to the evolving regulatory environment. How do you work with maybe regulatory bodies or industry thought leaders in the direction of your product development in addressing their concerns, but also delivering that innovation that needs to happen?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. I mean, the first thing we do is try not to be the smartest people in the room, right? We're never going to understand a given enterprise, a given sector's regulatory environment as well as they do. It's just super important that we say, hey, you know what? You're the experts, but let us do the work to make sure that using this data and doing best practices for your industry is well embedded into how you're handling it. So that's really what we try and do. We try and understand what the commonalities are, things like model cards or data cards, things like using Filecoin and IPFS's CIDs, content addressed IDs, which is critical for providing unambiguous hashes of the data that have been cryptographically verified and so on. Like, these are the core elements, the atoms, if you will, that you can use to build molecules and entire constructions out of that will adapt to your regulatory environment. Now, that said, it doesn't mean we're going to just stop. If someone comes along and says, hey, if you add this feature, it's going to make my life build much easier, we are happy to do that. The community's happy to submit a pull request and do that. Like, there's lots of things we can do around that. But it is one of those things where it's just going to take a while for us to get that kind of input and understand what's next.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a tough one, to be honest, because everything is still very much in flux.
Well, I mean, I really do think it's one of these things where people try and say, well, I'm going to come in and revamp your entire industry. Now, I'm just like, hey, slow down. There are a lot of really smart people. Let's be respectful of it and defer to greater wisdom.
Fair point. Okay, so I kind of get to the part of the show where, back from all of this and just focus on the David outside of crypto, outside of big data, outside of artificial intelligence. So, what else excites you outside all of this?
The thing that I'm most excited about around ML and AI is really the idea what it's providing as a value right now. And what it's doing is it is changing the way the inputs and outputs, for lack of a better, of the way things work. So previously, you had to construct a very specific input, including You had to structure your data in a certain way. You had to structure your query or whatever you were going to do to ask a question about that data, and so on. And then on the other side of it, you would get an answer, and the answer would oftentimes require a different level of translation. Where we are right now with things like ML, it's extremely exciting to see how people are taking the raw ML models and throwing a ridiculous amount of data, the entire internet against it, and then allowing people to ask natural language queries against it and have it spit out something that is valuable. Now, there are things like hallucinations that may get it wrong, and your code may not be that well structured, and so on. But you're so far ahead of where you were previously that you're able to do a whole bunch of really interesting things around. And that's super exciting. It's just a force multiplier for what people are doing, whether or not it's coding or writing or getting questions, getting your questions answered in a really straightforward way. That said, it's not a panacea. I'm not one of these people who think that the ASI or AGI is going to come along and replace all humans tomorrow. I just think there's going to be an interface between these apps and humanity, or the real world, for a long time. Not because these things aren't going to be super smart, but just because the real world is based in this very, very long history. You look at things like, why are people building robots that look like humans, right? Or are the size and shape of humans? Surely there's a more efficient way to build an object that carries around a box. And yeah, that's probably true, except the entire world is built for a human-shaped thing. Something that is, whatever, half a meter wide and around 2 meters tall and has these like two limbs that can pick up things and two limbs for walking. That's how the world looks. That's how stairs work and boxes work and shelves work and doors.
Relatability?
Well, relatability is one thing, but I think it's more like what the interfaces look like. And so, sure, you could build models that interacted with other models in a really sophisticated way. But when it comes to interacting with the real world, that's where having an interface that is very natural for the way that human beings need it to be is so critical. And that's one of the things I'm, really most excited about right now.
So it sounds like you lean more towards functionality versus having it to fit like that human face or mold that we all are familiar with. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting take on it because you're looking for efficiency, not necessarily aesthetic, so to speak.
Exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that piece. I almost feel like I didn't get that out of you outside of AI and crypto. We sort of landed back there again.
I know you have a ton of crypto listeners, and I really am a huge fan. What I will say is that what I saw in crypto that was so hard for so long is just a lot of people working on phenomenally interesting tech that was academically pure, right? An academically pure solution will always lose to something that is easy to use, but is sitting over the top of baling wire and chewing gum, right? And one of my bits of advice is like build smaller, build hackier. Like it's okay if you're getting into users' hands, but asking whatever anyone to like have an offline wallet that where you print out your seed phrase, and every time you start, you have to go through 3 levels of sign in order to make it happen. Don't get me wrong, I understand from a security perspective why you do that, but there's no way the average human's going to do that. And not because the average human doesn't want to be secure. It's just like, just think about it. It's so freaking hard. And people have other things to do in their life.
Yeah, no, that's fair. You touch on the age-old theory versus practice problem or concept. This has all been very, very fascinating and enlightening, David. Really appreciate you being on the show, taking the time to unpack a lot of these intricate and tough questions, and especially in this emerging technology area. So we really thank you and appreciate you.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. It is a huge area of passion. Would love to chat with more folks. But you think about scenarios or think about things that you might like to use our platform for, You tell me.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Happy to continue to spread the word and follow your development as this space continues to expand from an innovation lens.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and give us a good 5-star rating and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcasts so you can get all the latest conversations from the most interesting founders, builders, and investors from across the world. Thanks so much and have a good one.